Well, welcome everyone. Really nice to see you all this midday. I'm Cedra Dufon-Heidi, and I am the current president of the board for the Washington Women's Foundation. So that means I'm a member and I'm a board member, and I have been in the foundation for about 21, I think is what we're calling it officially, years. But what I'm here for today is just to say thank you and that we're really excited that you're here. I see faces I recognize, I see names that I don't, and I think that's one of the coolest things about this whole piece of our work together is that it brings together folks that have done it before, folks that are really new to the work, and it's just a great entry point to think about how we want to be in community together within the foundation, and you're going to be doing lots of that today and going forward. But also about how we want to think about the broader community that we're all a part of. So this is really just me on behalf of the board to say thank you. We're excited about the work. We're excited to see about what you all do together and with us all. And that this is just a super cool event and an activity to get to do. I've done a number of grant committees. I haven't done it in a couple of years because board service has taken a little bit more of my time. But really excited to be able to be here with you all today and to welcome you and to be able to hear a little bit more about how you're all going to work through these 3 priorities this year. So I'm going to turn it over to Maria to do our land acknowledgement and a few other top of items. But thanks again for your work on behalf of the foundation, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.
Hello, thank you, Cedra. Hello, everybody. I am Maria Colby-Wolf. I'm the president and CEO here at Washington Women's Foundation. I'm hoping that most of you know that. And I'm going to dive in today. Really happy to see you all, by the way, and happy to be with you as you start this grant making season in 2025. As you know, we start off with a reminder that we are gathered on a stolen and unceded homeland within a context of broken treaties and unresolved harms to Indigenous peoples. For those of us in Seattle, we are on the land of the Duwamish people and of the Coast Salish, the Stillaguamish, the Duwamish, the Muckleshoot, and the Suquamish, who have made and continue to make their homes around the Salish Sea in the shadow of Mount Tahoma. We must recognize really, that we live, work, play, and learn in a nation and a state of great wealth. A nation with wealth created by the subjugation and exploitation of African peoples, brought to this land through chattel slavery. A state with wealth that stands indebted to exploited Chinese immigrants who built the railroads, to Japanese Americans whose livelihoods were stolen in the internment camps of World War II, and to immigrant and migrant workers who to this day labor in the fields and farms, wineries and orchards across our very prosperous state. We honor and uplift today the original Indigenous stewards of this land, the forced contributions from generations of Africans, and the exploited labor of immigrants and migrant workers yesterday and today. And as we work together this year, I ask you to acknowledge the stolen land and stolen labor and recognize that the impact of these wrongs reverberates and in many cases is still being perpetrated into our present day. Indeed, most of the work we do and the harms we seek to heal are directly tied to these historical roots I mentioned in this acknowledgement of land and labor. And in many ways, the work you are about to embark on is the work of addressing the repercussions of those wrongs. So no small tasks that lie before you. As you enter into your grant making this year, I encourage you to keep our values in the forefront of your mind. And Catherine, if we could pop up our values for everyone to see. I really do encourage you to keep these values in the forefront of your mind as you go through the work that you are about to do. Build relationships with one another and with the applicants that you are going to be meeting along this road. Enter into conversations with a learning mindset, which is by definition curious and humble. We're working to counteract systems of oppression. And to do so, we must be bold. That is the job. We must share power with others. It's what the trust-based philanthropy is kind of all about. And we will have to sometimes get uncomfortable together. Advancing equity changes the world. It is not easy work. you will have lots of wonderful conversations. I applaud you for diving into what this all means. Next slide. Our values, those values that are on that slide and that sort of pop up everywhere, our values are what led us to create a community norms document that you are also going to be seeing if you haven't already. And those community norms speak to how we put those values into practice in the way in which we operate with one another. This is actually another aspect of our equality work. One of the classic ways that people feel excluded is when they're in a situation where there are a set of norms that they don't know, but everyone else seems to. By articulating our norms, we are working to make explicit our welcome of all. Sometimes, even when you make norms explicit, however, there can be questions and confusions, maybe even disagreements. That's okay. We're all different people. That's one of the joys of coming together. For this reason, though, we do have a community resource group, which is a small force of board members who are all on call to support you as you go through this work and as you put our norms and values into practice. If you have a question, if something happens in one of your conversations that doesn't sit quite right with you or isn't settled in the course of the conversation, isn't settled right then and there, that can happen. Don't let it fester. The community resource group is available to help. And their email is it's not community resource group at Washington Women's Foundation. You'll be provided with that as well. So remember that we have our values and take them into our conversations. Remember that we have our land and labor acknowledgement that understands the historical roots of the oppressions we're seeking to alleviate. Remember that we have our community norms and our community resource group to help you navigate these conversations. And know that I am so very excited about the work that you all are about to take on, the learning that you'll be doing together. And this is the work that you do. So Bobby, why don't you go ahead, take it from there and tell them what awaits them.
Oh, so many things, so many fun things. My name is Bobby Conti. I am the chair of this committee and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'd like to start us off with an icebreaker. I believe we're doing it via Mentimeter, which is where we get a link and we type in our thoughts. But the icebreaker I'd like to talk about are, what are you most looking forward to with the Collective Grants Committee this year? What is exciting you or enticing you here? Can we get a link to the Mentimeter? Oh, there it is. I don't have a link.
Are we to type it in or speak it?
There's a link in the chat to Mentimeter, and you can join with the code that's there at the top of the slide, and you type it in. But we could also do spoken ones. We can also do typed in the chat. I'll take anything. Learning, community, yes. Connection.
I don't get it.
Yay, relationship. Working together. Thank you, Jenny. Renew. Oh, that's a good one. Challenge. Mad props to whoever said challenge, because yes, it will be a challenge. It'll be a good challenge, but we've got our work cut out for us. Learning about a new topic, climate, social intersect, broadening understanding. Impact. Yeah. Fun. Yes. This is absolutely my favorite committee to be on. It is fun. I agree. All right. Clarifying objectives. All right. Awareness. I can't keep up with all the changes. Working community. Mental health awareness. Yes. Yes, we have some good and meaty topics this particular year. We do every year, but I'm looking forward to it. All right. I think we can move on from the icebreaker. Meeting new team members. Yay! Yes. Okay. So with that, let's talk a little bit about trust-based philanthropy. because it's rather important to what we do. And it's one of the things I think that makes us rather unique, actually, in the areas that we're in. Trust-based philanthropy seeks to demonstrate humility and collaboration in what we do and how we show up in all aspects of our work as grant makers. And this is something that's going to come up over and over again in the conversations you have in your work groups as you look to evaluate the different organizations. Next slide, please. So grant refresh, we have 3 themes for 2025. We have, so basically every other year we have 3 themes. So this year, healthcare, climate and agricultural justice, and education are the broad themes. We will see these themes again in 2027, and we saw them similarly in 2023. More specifically, the priorities are youth mental health. So investing in culturally relevant mental health and connection building services for young people defined as ages 26 or younger, including organizations with counseling staff, working with a network of external providers. We're interested in learning more about systems of mental health care and how young people, again, 26 and younger, interact and heal within these systems, including systems designed to address youth addiction recovery. And there's mitigating the impact of climate change, investing in alleviating and reversing the effect of climate change on those communities most impacted by its effects in Washington State. We are interested in learning more about how climate change has impacted communities in Washington State and the solutions those communities are creating. And last but absolutely not least, adult educational opportunities. Investing in non-traditional adult education programs and educational opportunities in support of adults navigating the requirements of employment and civic participation. This may include, for example, immigrant and refugee education services, and there's a few LOIs along those lines there. We are interested in learning more about non-traditional adult education programs and services designed to support adults, and the definition of adults for this one is 18 years and older, as they navigate the requirements of employment and civic participation. Next slide, please. So we're about to enter the LOI phase. It's the first phase of this work. We are kicking it off. The leadership team, which is myself, Catherine Galban, and Gwen, oh my goodness, I'm blanking. Gwen, please forgive me. I keep on thinking of Gwen's email address, which is weird. But the 3 of us went and pre-screened all of the LOIs to present a shortened list for the work group. In some work groups, this was a relative no-brainer. For example, in climate and agricultural justice, we had 28 LOIs. But in others, there were 95 and I think 110 LOIs respectively, which was a lot. We read through each and every one. We came together to form a consensus on which ones should be perhaps set aside, and the desire to get down to no more than 30-ish LOIs per work group. This is based on feedback from previous years, because more than that gets a little unwieldy and is rather intense for this first phase. And by that first phase, what I mean is after these meetings in the LOI phase, we are going to winnow down from those 30 to 10, which is a lot harder than it can seem. And that moves forward, those 10 move forward to the next stage of the grant process. So the next stage is a new sort of combination of what we used to do. And it's, I think I like this a little bit more. It's the learning and conversation phase. So we basically have 2 chunks within this stage. Chunk 1 is basically taking those 10 organizations and learning as much as we can about them, looking at their 990s, looking at their websites, looking at their socials, trying to figure out, what are these organizations and what do they really do? And from there, the work group selects 5 of those 10 to move on to have conversations. And those conversations are a selection of folks from those organizations. Oh yes, LI, letter of inquiry. Anyway, so we have conversations with folks from those organizations. So it's 2 or more people from the Women's Foundation, and usually 2 or more people from the organization. Usually there's a board member, a person who actually has boots on the ground there, and usually the ED, to have that conversation over an hour and a half, 2 hours about what they do and how they do it. Or basically really ask some questions and get some answers. From there, the work group winnows down from those 5 to 2. And those two get forwarded to the ballot stage, which is shared with the entire membership, along with all of the materials that came up through the process. So recordings of the conversations, the research work that will have been done as part of learning, all of that is available to the membership should they choose to use it as part of their vote. Next slide, please. Then we have voting and celebration. So we winnow down to the two in each of the three groups. Those go forward to the membership votes, one vote for one lady. And then we reveal the grantees and celebrate together in the grant award celebration, which is always a good time. I enjoy that myself. All right, let's talk about work group leadership. And here is where I finally remember that Gwen's last name is Caldwell. I'm so sorry. Youth mental health is being led by Sue Eastgard, Cindy Kruger, and advised by Catherine Galban. Mitigating the impact of climate change is helmed by Ingrid Nelson and advised by me, Bobby Conti. Adult education opportunities is led by Sharon Hamill and advised by Gwen Colwell. And we're at LOI review. All right.
Thank you so much, Bobby, for taking us through the brand overview of all that's to come. It's a lot. We know it's exciting, but in my role on staff as our Grants and Programs Director, what I get to do is take you through the LOI phase in a bit more detail. And before we do that, I just want to highlight the expertise in the room. So if you've been on a grant committee before, can you just sort of wave your hand or go off and meet and say, me? Because I want all the new committee members to know that you are entering this work with folks who have done this before. And so they will be there to help you and to guide you if you have questions, in addition to the amazing leadership team that we have with Bobby, Catherine, and Gwen, and the work group leaders as well with Ingrid, Sue, Cindy, and Sharon. You also have each other. We are a leaderful organization, and I hope you'll rely on each other. Another great resource you have is the Guide to Collective Grants, which will be sent as a follow-up. If you are brand new, we didn't want to overwhelm you with materials in advance because this is truly our kickoff. So in my follow-up email, you'll receive a link to our Dropbox folder, which has everything you need to know in one place, including the Guide to Collective Grants, which is sort of our very thorough everything you might want to know in a written form, if that is your preferred way to learn. So that's coming to you. But for now, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into LOI review. So the focus today, we can go to the next slide, Catherine. Thank you. The focus today and through the middle of the next month is our LOI review. So LOIs, or letters of inquiry, are short descriptions of each organization, and they are going to be available through our grants management system reviewer, which I will give you a sneak preview of in a little bit. During this phase, as Bobby shared, your group's mission is to analyze and select 10 organizations to move forward to the next phase of the work. For your participation, we ask you not to miss more than one meeting simply because it's a lot of information that's shared at each meeting, and you would miss too much to be able to vote knowledgeably. And since we do some of these meetings on Zoom, if your group is okay with it, you can always ask to have a meeting recorded so that you can stay up to date on what was discussed. Attendance is also important for balancing a shared workload, right? We are a collective, we are doing this together. And so that means that you will be assigned LOIs for you to review in partnership with a teammate. And we need to make sure we're balancing that load. And so if you do need to miss a meeting, just make arrangements with your work group leaders to let them know what you need to miss. And then the last thing around attendance is around being present to vote. So we have 4 meetings in this phase. The first meeting is focused on learning together about the priority area, discussing any relevant definitions, like, you know, how Bobby highlighted, what do we mean by adult? What do we mean by young person? That kind of thing. Developing that shared understanding of the priority itself that will support your decision-making as a group. The following 3 meetings are really used to take a look at those LOIs and decide on the 10 organizations moving forward. I want to highlight an educational opportunity for you. I sent it out in an email in advance, but we have our 101 series coming up. The first one is actually next week, and we have 3 of them, one for each priority area. And there are going to be really exceptional panels. Catherine has got some excellent speakers to agree to come share their expertise with us to really dive deeper into each priority area. So register for those. And if you're not able to attend, make sure you watch those recordings because they're very instructive in both the LOI phase, but in further phases as well, just for understanding the priority and how our organizations are working within the challenges that each issue area present. Final note here, voting must be kept confidential until we make announcements to the public, just so we can make sure that we are managing our communication with organizations before it goes out more broadly. All right. Next up, I want to dive into our grant criteria, which is focused on increasing equity and reducing disparities in Washington state. So we have been focused in this area with our criteria since 2019. We've learned a lot. We've adapted our criteria to incorporate feedback from both members and organizations over the years. Little tweaks, big changes, all that good stuff. I want to highlight a couple definitions here related to the criteria and let you know that there's a lot more we have defined in that guide to grants. So we use the definition of equity from Philanthropy Northwest, which is that equity is the condition that would be achieved if one's identity no longer predicted how one fared in life. And we define disparities as differences in life experiences, life outcomes, and the distributions of society's benefits and burdens determined by a person's race, gender identity, and or other characteristics historically linked to discrimination and or exclusion. More of a mouthful than the equity definition. The criteria you see linked up here on the slide is also on our website. It's also in the guide. It will be something that you refer back to again and again. And so I want to highlight one of the other resources in the Dropbox. You'll see we did a panel a couple years back that really highlighted how different members have engaged with the criteria over the years. It's just a nice video recording with members sharing their experience of deepening their understanding of the criteria over time. It seems maybe simple, straightforward. It might seem confusing to others, but over time, as you wrestle with it and as you look at organizations that are applying this criteria, you start to develop your own understanding of what it all really means. All right. Next up, I want to talk about advocacy. So this is something that's different this year. So if you were around on the membership last year, we held, and yeah, we can go to the next slide on advocacy here. We had a advocacy task force to really tackle the question of how do we address advocacy and collective action within the Washington Women's Foundation. We've done some advocacy focused grant making, we've done some advocacy learning, and we wanted to dive deep and say, okay, what's the right way for us to address this here? And we went through a very thoughtful process, did a survey of our membership, our broader community to get some input, and the board did decide in response to the recommendations from that task force to fold advocacy grants into our collective grants program. And this decision came from the desire to really underscore our commitment to supporting advocacy and to acknowledge that the critical work that advocacy does in manifesting systemic change. So the criteria has shifted a little bit from the years past because we've incorporated that advocacy work ever so slightly. We anticipate that some priorities will have more advocacy-focused submissions than others. In fact, we did see that when we were taking a look in the pre-screen of the LOIs, and that's okay. I don't want to underline here, this is our first year trying advocacy incorporated into collective grants. And we are a learning organization through and through. And that means that when we try something new, we start with our open minds and we see what we get, we'll find out what we don't know as we go. Some of you might be more comfortable with advocacy work. Some of you might be more comfortable with service-based work. And that's all wonderful. And we will learn together. So please keep that in mind. If you have questions about advocacy, if there are things that don't make sense to you, track that. Tell your work group leaders, tell the leadership, tell the staff, so that we can make sure we are being responsive to this feedback when it comes to incorporating advocacy. Great. All right, so I want to talk a little bit nitty gritty and talk about what we mean when we say general operating support. So at Washington Women's Foundation, we only offer unrestricted funding, which means we make grants for general operating support. These grants support the overall mission of the organization as a whole. We want to encourage innovation, creativity, and nimbleness in our nonprofit partners, which is done best with that kind of flexible general operating support. This type of funding also shows that we have confidence in the leadership of the organization. It sends the message that we know that organizations are the experts in their work, that they know their communities, they know what their communities need, and they know how to best address those needs. And if you're not familiar with the foundation world, I want to share that these types of grants are rare and very highly sought after and desired. It's probably part of why we had as many LOIs as Bobby shared those big numbers earlier. So organizations can really use unrestricted funding for whatever they need it for. It's truly unrestricted. That means they can use it for their programs and projects. They could use it for a capital campaign or capacity building needs. But we, as funders, don't focus our inquiry on what they will do with the funds. We're not asking, what are you doing with the money? Instead, our goal is to learn about and support the organization as a whole. We know that might feel uncomfortable for some folks, but our goal is really to operate from a place of trust, put into practice the ideals of trust-based philanthropy that Bobby highlighted earlier. And for folks that have been around a little bit longer, you might be more comfortable with it. So if this is new to you, touch base with them about how they, the more experienced members got more comfortable with it along the way. Okay, the next thing I want to highlight for all of you is eligibility. So Bobby talked about the pre-screening process. I wanted to let you know that in our grants management system online reviewer, you will still have access to all the LOIs that were submitted, because we want you to have that transparency into the grant making process. The pre-screen is not to say you can't see one LOI or another. It's really just to allow more time to dive deep into a smaller subset of organizations that have already been identified to have a better fit with that criteria that we looked at earlier. So all of the organizations have also been screened for eligibility, which is not about the criteria, but is focused on being a 501c3 or fiscally sponsored organization, having a presence in Washington State, and an organization that doesn't discriminate on any basis. We also looked for organizations, that we don't fund scholarships, individuals or endowments, or organizations that serve an exclusively sectarian purpose. So we take a look through that. If we've missed something and you think, I don't think this organization is eligible, flag that for us. We're a collective, right? We're working together and we're human. So we want to make sure that everyone has access to all the organizations for that reason. All right. Next up, I want to talk about what you'll see when you're looking at the letter of inquiry itself. So there are 4 questions, 4 narrative questions that each organization will respond to, in addition to some basic questions around the name of the organization, the mission, the location, things like that. So the LOI is intended to be brief, right? That's why there's only 4 questions. It's not a full analysis, application, dive deep into an organization. It's not a full proposal. It's meant to be an introduction to the organization so that we can assess that fit with the grant criteria and then decide if we want to move them forward and dive deeper and learn more. It's kept short intentionally so that it's not a huge ask or huge burden for organizations, regardless of their size, and it's not intended to be a complete picture of their work. It's just the first introduction. So the first 2 questions are, how does your organization focus on providing services to or advocating on behalf of people affected by inequity due to race and/or gender identity? And then the second question is, how is your organization accountable to the community being served? The next 2 questions you'll see on the next slide are, describe how your organization addresses systemic gender and/or racial inequities in one of the 3 priorities. So that's the question that's really diving deep into the priority work itself. And then the last question you'll see is different, probably the most significantly different from in years past, which is asking organizations to demonstrate how their organization accomplishes one of the 3 following options. There's A, B, and C. A is how you reduce disparities and or achieve more equitable outcomes through the direct service work. So that's really for an organization that only does direct service work. B is how the advocacy methods you employ reduce disparities and or result in more equitable systemic outcomes. So on the other side of the spectrum, organizations that only do advocacy work. And then C is for the organizations that do both. So how you incorporate both services and advocacy to reduce disparities and or achieve more equitable outcomes, both directly and systemically. So we wanted to make space for the variety of ways that we know nonprofit organizations are doing this work and ask for that question around demonstrating that. And you'll notice the 4 questions here line up directly to the 4 elements of the grant criteria itself, and that is very much intentional. All right, next up here, I want to talk about how we approach reviewing LOIs themselves. So we ask you to bring that open mind, that curiosity. You will feel more successful if you think not about eliminating nonprofits that don't fit, but allowing organizations that really shine and have that excellent fit to rise up and keep us focused there. So don't let the past dictate the present. Think of it as a clean slate from years past. You might see grantees in the mix, organizations that have been considered in the past in the mix. We are no longer asking organizations to wait to apply. So you will likely see some familiar names in that list if you've been around for a couple years. And I want to highlight that in that first phase, we're not asking you to do in-depth research. Absolutely. Go to the websites if you want, poke around, see if there's something that's interesting to you, dive deep if you want. But the request from us is to keep it light on a general sense of things. You know, you can go deep if you want, but that's not our ask from you. So you don't need to look up financial documents. Don't spend that time on the 990s because we'll do that later in the next phase of the work. Just keep it light and focus on the grant criteria. We do also ask that you don't contact organizations directly. So that includes visiting them or calling an organization to get more information related to the grant itself. That's just because we try to streamline communication and make it as smooth and unpainful a process for organizations as we can. All right, so now we're going to shift gears and look at an actual LOI that was submitted in the past so you can practice applying grant criteria in real time. We took out identifying characteristics. If you could figure out who this is, just keep it to yourself. If you've been on this training in the past, it's just going to be familiar to you, but this is really an opportunity, especially for new folks, to get that practice before we set you free and set you on the task of reviewing the LOIs from this year. All right, so I'll read out this blurb and I'm going to ask you what you see, and I'm going to ask you to come off mute and see if there's anything that stands out to you as a great fit with the criteria. Excuse me. So this organization is a cohort-based program that utilizes research-based strategies to study and promote college retention and graduation among men of color. Research shows long-standing racial inequities in educational outcomes from early childhood to graduate education. Men of color graduate at lower rates than their white and female counterparts. The organization provides multiple pathways for cohorts to access networks and resources that will advance their success, focusing on academic, civic, and leadership opportunities. The cohort experience, including the program curriculum and mentorship, spans the entire student's journey. Excuse me, each student's entire journey. So who sees something related to the criteria here? What stands out to you as a good fit for the criteria? Let's see if I can see if anyone's raising their hand. Oops, I missed some chat, folks. Thank you, everybody. Bobby, for chiming in there. See if I missed anything down the road. Okay, don't be shy. Who wants to raise their hand? Go ahead, Christine.
Okay. That they have the research that shows longstanding racial inequities, that they are showing what the issue is that they are addressing. They're very specific about it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Christine. And I thought I saw Colleen. Did I see you as well?
I would raise my hand and then Christine said what I was going to say.
Okay, great. You're already aligned. Yeah, it's really serving a specific community that's affected by racial and gender inequity. So they're talking specifically about men of color. Naya, is that how you pronounce your name? Did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, sorry, it took that long to figure out how to raise my hand.
Oh, good.
The other thing is that they are directly focusing on the community that is being impacted. So they are directly providing access to networks and resources to those people.
Absolutely. There's a sense of intentionality here, and that's a word that we find ourselves coming back to year over year. There is an intention around who is being served and including them in the process. All right, let's go on to the next slide here. Similarly, going to ask for your thoughts on criteria fit here. So this is the same organization. They say to ensure that the communities being served are visibly leading, we include students on our steering committee, letting students guide the organization's mission, principles, and direction. The staff and board is comprised entirely of people of color with expertise supporting underrepresented college students. To ensure ongoing accountability to our cohorts and their communities, we conduct ongoing formative assessments to continually interrogate and improve our services and interventions. Students offer feedback through surveys every quarter and through individual interviews once a year, and staff use that feedback to inform future curricular and program development. Okay, so what stands out to you here when we think about criteria? Let's see. Stacy put in the chat, accountability to and representation of the populations that you serve. Do you want to share anything else, Stacy? It's totally fine if not. Go ahead.
What we look for in these organizations is a way to make sure that the population that we're serving, that their voice is heard and part of the decision making. Whether it's data and impact, even better, that their actual voices are part of the design and implementation process. And then the feedback loop, that they have a way to improve based on the feedback from that community. Thank you.
Thanks, Stacy. So well put. Anyone want to add anything there? Jessica, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that they specified that the community they serve is the majority or the entirety of the decision-making body. So it's not just like a token position in the decision-making, and that they're actively involved in that process.
Absolutely. That's huge. And it looks really different for different organizations, but they clearly identified what it looks like for them here, right? So they're led by the community they serve. They give a bit more detail on what that looks like when it comes to their staff and their board, and they emphasize specific ways that they're reflective of the community being served and incorporate that feedback from the community into their work itself. And this ensures truly a culturally responsive organization that deeply understands the issue that the community is facing. All right. Last one here for you. And this is, again, the same organization. Since 2016, the organization has recruited 3 freshman cohorts of undergraduate men of color. Data from the first 2 cohorts show that grade point averages are higher for students in the cohort than comparison groups. And qualitative data also documents how their participation has increased their campus engagement, access to student leadership opportunities, and sense of belonging. As one of our 4 developmental areas, developing each undergraduate student's leadership capacity is an important measure of success and woven into the program's curriculum. All right, so here we're looking for a fit with some of that last part of the criteria. Any thoughts here? What stands out to you? Go ahead, Heidi.
Well, this is pretty much of a perfect group. I mean, they have qualitative data and quantitative data, hard data that their grade point averages are higher, that they're, participating more, obviously leadership and sense of belonging. Those are all, great goals for them to have, and they seem to be hitting their goals. So it's everything we would look for, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Heidi. And thank you for highlighting that, this might be the perfect fit. So sometimes you won't get both qualitative and quantitative data, right? Naya, go ahead.
I am curious at this stage how you would determine if their success is based on the fact that of how they recruit. So in this
Mm.
specific case, the people who would sign up for this sort of thing probably already are more engaged. And so how do you know that it's a fair evaluation? And would you even try to figure that out at this stage?
That's such a good question, and already getting deep. It makes me excited about what's to come. Bobby, if you want to chime in too, I'll share my thoughts initially, and then pass it over to you. I think at this stage, it's likely that you won't know that from this initial introduction. You might have sort of hints of what that might look like, but as you're going through, if you think, "Wow, this is a really great fit," but I have this question. It's really great to mark that down, to write it down in whatever format you like, whether online in our system or in your own notes, just so you can come back to it and say, if they do move forward, this is something we want to make sure to research further. Bobby, do you want to add anything there? Maybe not. All right, for the sake of time, I will ask you, Bobby, if you wanted to chime in via chat, go for it. Otherwise, we'll move on. Oh, and I just wanted to note here on my notes that we don't have examples from advocacy organizations yet, right? So these three are from the old criteria without advocacy folded in. So we don't know what it's really going to look like or how they are going to describe their impact or what it's going to look like when they describe their advocacy work as opposed to direct service work. So we'll see how it goes. I'm sure it'll look different in some cases and similar in others. And I hope this exercise is helpful. We also have in the Dropbox a handout with some grant criteria review tips that outline some things to look for, some key phrases, things like that. Before we move on, questions. Adrienne.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I just wanted to say that I guess from my perspective that I'm not looking for someone that has quantitative and qualitative measurements. I think that it's fantastic if an organization does, but so many nonprofits don't have the resources to do that kind of work. I think that if there is some sort of systematic way that they assess progress and they have some way that they measure what progress looks like, then that in my mind is a positive indication of how they're attempting to ensure that they're accountable in the work that they do. I think it's unusual to have an organization, a grassroots organization that has the resources to do qualitative and quantitative measurements.
Couldn't agree more, Adrienne. It's rare, right? And it's expensive. And we're often looking at organizations that don't have access to that kind of funds for that type of, assessment and research of around their own programming. Yeah. So thank you. So well put. Any other thoughts or questions as we are here? Brianna, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, is this an example of the strongest application as an LOI? I just wanted to see how it would rank if it was in the evaluation process.
Yeah, a great question. I would say this we picked because we believe it's a good fit with the grant criteria. As you're going through, one of the things you'll find is there's a lot of really amazing organizations that perhaps don't fit with the criteria. So we can say, thank you for your work, and we're moving on to the ones that have this fit because we are trying to be laser focused on the criteria itself. It's part of our integrity as a grant maker, right? But there will be organizations that are, some are better fits in one area of the criteria and better fits, some are the better fits in a different area of the criteria. And I think this will be an especially interesting year for us with the advocacy question as well. So that's all to say this, yes, this was an example of a good fit And when you go into the reviewer and poke around, you can see organizations that maybe have been pre-screened out so that you can take a look at organizations that are less of a fit with the criteria this year. I saw two hands up, Gwen and then Tony. Is that the order?
I just wanted to say there's going to be a difference in the way the LOIs are presented if they have like a professional fundraiser or, or even if all of the people on staff, English is their first language and people and organizations that don't. So it's really important to remember that the sort of the spectrum of language that you're going to see in these LOI groups is going to be, sometimes it'll be really wide and sometimes it won't be, but try to keep in mind that you aren't sort of putting some sort of artificial level of like professional fundraising and excluding out organizations that don't use the right buzzwords or don't have perfect grammar and things like that.
Yes, thank you, Gwen. It's really, and you can kind of even get stuck on that even if you've been doing it a while, right? So it's a perennial thing to remind yourself of no matter how long you've been doing this work. Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious, how I don't even know if this is the right place to ask this, but
That's okay.
how you account for geography and the number of people impacted, because it is the Washington Women's Foundation. So if a certain organization is really successful, but it only serves Northeast Seattle, are you less likely to move them forward, and how, where that criteria fits in with everything else?
Such a good question, Tony. And it actually is like a perfect segue to my next slide. So I will answer that and we'll also dive in. So we're not looking specifically for organizations that have statewide impact or that are serving a certain number of individuals through their services or even through their advocacy. We have funded organizations that are super specific to a neighborhood. We have funded organizations that work across the entire state and everything in between. So there's not a preference, I would say, for one type of geographic impact over another. But we do want to think about location and geography when we're doing our LOI review, because, there are organizations that are working on teeny tiny budgets in Seattle versus teeny tiny budgets in Yakima, and it looks really different compared to each other, right? So they might be a medium-sized organization in Yakima, but it's very expensive to do events and things like that in Seattle, and so that might make them a small organization. That same budget might make them a small organization in Seattle. We also want to think about, when we think about the impact of our grant, we want to take geography into account. There's a lot more funding opportunities and funding available on the west side of our state. We know that it's been documented. It's interesting and frustrating for organizations on the east side. And so we want to think about that when we consider ourselves as a statewide funder. That doesn't mean we don't fund in King County or we don't want to fund in King County. We just want to have geography as a consideration when we think about context as a whole. Does that answer your question, Tony? Okay, great. The other context I wanted to share with you here, let's see, we covered most of that with Tony's great question. But the other thing is the variety in types of LOIs when it comes to size itself. So we've funded, like I said, teeny tiny organizations and large multi-million-dollar organizations, which means it can be really hard to compare. You can't compare apples to apples between diverse organizations. So we take that context and we make considerations relevant to each organization's particular situation and needs. The element that Gwen highlighted earlier, I want to underline as well. We might see organizations where English is not their first language, and we want to make sure we're considering that many organizations do not have professional grant writing staff. Some of them might be a staff of one, and that means the executive director is doing all the work and all the grant writing in their quote unquote spare time. So we want to take that into consideration when you're looking for the way things are spelled or written, or, if they're using the right buzzwords, things like that. That being said, our grants are large to any size or type of organization. It means a lot, especially to have unrestricted funds, whether they're large, small, urban, or rural. All right, the next thing I want to cover here is around risk. So we can go to the next slide here. Risk is inherent to any funding decision, right? But it also comes with great reward, as we know, and your role on the grant committee is to identify risks and determine whether an investment is worth pursuing. So we want you to ask, is the potential impact worth it? Over the years, we've seen great value in funding organizations that can and sometimes do close their doors. We had an organization from 2022 close their doors just last year. So it happens not all the time, but it does happen. And even when an organization closes, we learn from that process. We're supporting a community as they go through their closing. And we know that we use that learning to improve, right? So we want to trust the due diligence process and know that we can take risks together. Some members might feel more comfortable with that risk taking, some members a little bit less so, but we want to tell you that if you're worried about making a wrong decision, there is no wrong decisions and there are no perfect ones either. The power of the collective, the collaborative grant-making process lies in the group. So you're all reading these LOIs and learning more about these organizations, bringing your unique perspectives into the discussion, and that is our strength. Together, you get to interpret the criteria and evaluate and make decisions about what moves forward as a group. So it's not all on you as an individual. All right, so I want to briefly talk about the 3 C's here before we get into reviewer. So we adhere to the rule of the 3 C's: communication, confidentiality, and conflict of interest. So communication is really just about not communicating with organizations while they're under consideration. Get involved, go to their events and stuff later on. Confidentiality, we want to protect the integrity of our process and show respect for the organization we receive from organizations by keeping it confidential. And conflict of interest, we do have an official policy that is shared in the guide. So if you are on the board or staff of an organization that is under consideration, we just ask that you switch to a different work group. So you can let your work group leader or myself know if anything comes up and we'll get you sorted. All right, so on to reviewer, shifting gears a little bit. We use an online portal to review and accept letters of inquiry. After this meeting, I'll send you an invitation to create an account for the reviewer if you haven't made one in the past. And if you used it last year, you'll use the same login information, but you'll see a fresh batch of LOIs once I get the accounts all sorted. If you need technical assistance, let me know. We also have a guide to help you navigate reviewer itself, which will also be in the Dropbox. So I am going to share my screen and highlight a few of the features here. All right, so I have logged in as one of our members here, so you can get a sense for what it'll look like for you when you log in. You'll see a list of organizations. And one thing I want to highlight for you is if you click on this submission name, it will sort it alphabetically. We tried to get them to do that automatically. It is not a feature they have available, so sorry about that if that's frustrating, but it will show up probably jumbled. If you click here, the caret up, it's sorting alphabetically from Z to A. Click again, it'll sort alphabetically A to Z. You can also sort by other things, but I think the main thing you'll want to sort by is the name itself. You can always search as well. So here in this form, you could search for the name of the organization. Here we go. I see one there. I'll just search for, and then it'll pull up. So that's probably going to be your go-to if you're looking for a specific LOI. While we're looking at one, just picked at random, not for any particular reason. If you want to take a look at the LOI itself, you'll click this eyeball here, and that'll pull it up. You can take a look through, read through, click through their website if you'd like. You'll see their mission, their geographic area and budget, and then we get to the narrative section here. So that's what I mentioned, those 4 points are here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I want to highlight here on the side the notes option. So if you'd like to take hard copy notes, go for it. If you would like to have your notes tracked here online, just click add note. type whatever you want. If you want to share it with the other members of your work group, you can click share, or you can keep it confidential by leaving it unclicked and then save it. The evaluations, this is an optional tool. If it helps you to evaluate here on the reviewer system itself, you click evaluate now, and then you'll go through and it'll ask you questions on each of the criteria elements. So that's, again, optional, and it will not be we don't use that evaluations in our work itself. If you like hard copy and you want to print things out, you click this little printer button. I will say right now, they have still not fixed it, even though I've given the feedback over time for many years. So it looks, it's very large and takes many pages to do something small. So you could, of course, print it this way, or you could always highlight information, copy it, and paste it into a separate document if you'd like. That's the main thing I want to highlight here. When we get to the next phase of the work, there'll be an option to look at attachments. That's here. There's nothing in there now. We are here on the form as well. And let's say you want to go back. You go to this double back arrow here, and that'll get you to the full list of organizations. Okay, I'm going to stop my share. Any questions on reviewer? And raise your hand if you have any. No. Okay. It's our system. We're working with it. Some people like it a lot. Some people like it less. All righty. Thank you, Leslie. Are the evaluation responses shared with the work group? Good question. Yeah. So your work group leaders will be able to see the responses, but not with the work group itself. And in the past, we haven't really used the evaluation in a formal way. So it's really more an internal tracking tool for yourself. Good question. Okay. All right, so before we move into our breakout rooms, I wanted to take a moment, pause, and reflect a little bit. If you don't mind, taking out a pen or paper or writing in a note to yourself on your computer, top 3 takeaways from today's presentation. And while you're doing that, maybe some writing time, I'm going to set up your breakout rooms. This is when we need your whole music, Barbara. All right. Top 3 takeaways. Okay. Alrighty, is there anything anyone would like to share? Just go ahead and raise your hand. Takeaways from today's.
This is Marilyn.
Go ahead.
Mine is don't panic.
I love that.
Yeah, I think the resources are available, and I am confident it will all become clearer as we do it.
Absolutely. We're in it together, right?
Exactly.
Tony, go ahead. Oh, Tony, I think you're muted.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
One of my takeaways as a former grant writer is that you really respect the integrity of the organization and you don't require deeply onerous applications as so many other foundations do.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, where it's very much that's the intention, right? That's our goal, is to be respectful of our nonprofit partners and treat them that way, right? Yeah. It's a wonderful takeaway. I'm going to have maybe one more takeaway here. Jessica, go for it.
I'm actually currently writing grants of current fundraiser, and I really appreciate that the organization seems to be fully committed to trust-based philanthropy in all aspects of the process and how you talk about things, and the fact that you had a member come in and talk about the different levels of professionalism that might come through in the letters and how that doesn't affect the outcome of whether or not that organization gets a grant, which I really appreciate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jessica. We've had a couple years of putting this work into practice into work, and learned a lot along the way. And by no means are we perfect at applying it, but we're definitely doing our best, and we hold each other accountable to this work as much as we can as well. Wonderful. All right, well, I have your breakout rooms almost ready. I'm going to go ahead and open them and then keep assigning you. If you have other questions, or if you're not assigned to a group yet, stick around and we'll get you assigned. If you are just a member and you wanted to listen and learn and aren't planning to participate, thank you for joining us. And we're excited to get started. Bobby, any last words before I open up these rooms?
No, just get ready. It's going to be fun. It's going to be intense, and it's going to be rewarding. So here we go.
Excellent. All right. The rooms are open and I will keep assigning you. You should see a prompt to join them if you haven't yet.